Imagine a man so friendly, so charming, so completely ordinary that if you saw him in a crowd, you would never give him a second thought. Now imagine this same man was responsible for one of the most chilling hidden crime sprees in British history. Over a span of several years, he systematically preyed on men, one after another, without them even knowing what had happened. A man who had it all, a respected position, a seemingly normal life yet behind closed doors. He harbored an unfathomable secret. He drugged and assaulted over 200 victims, but none of them realized what had happened to them until it was too late. How did a man like Reynhard Sinaga, a perfect predator, operate in plain sight without anyone suspecting a thing? While you are enjoying this interesting documentary, wouldn't you mind subscribing to the channel already? I am sure you would stay with me as we uncover the dark reality behind the facade. This is the story of a man who committed a horrific crime, but for years no one even noticed, until a single unexpected twist turned the case upside down, a twist that nobody saw coming. Because sometimes, when you think you know who someone is, it turns out you don't know them at all. Reynhard Sinaga was, on the surface, an ordinary man, an Indonesian PhD student living in Manchester, studying at the University of Leeds. He was known for being kind, approachable, and friendly, a regular face in the local nightlife scene. People saw him as an affable man, someone who could be counted on for a friendly conversation or even a helping hand if needed. But what people didn't know was that behind this persona, a deeply disturbing pattern was unfolding. Sinaga's method of targeting victims was simple, yet effective. He would often approach young men outside Manchester's bars and nightclubs, offering a place to stay or inviting them back to his apartment for drinks. He was a familiar, safe figure in the nightlife culture, someone who seemed harmless. After all, who would suspect a university student of being a predator? But once these men were inside his flat, they would quickly realize something wasn't right. Sinaga had laced their drinks with powerful sedatives, rendering them unconscious. He would then film his assaults, turning each one into a sickening, twisted archive of his crimes. Hundreds of videos, capturing men who had no idea what was happening to them. This was no spur-of-the-moment decision. For years, Sinaga had carefully constructed this web, meticulously targeting men, many of them unaware that they were walking right into the clutches of a predator. It wasn't until one victim, in 2017, broke free that the true scale of Sinaga's crimes began to unravel. The victim, still in a daze after being drugged, managed to escape Sinaga's apartment and ran to a nearby police station. The police were stunned. This wasn't an isolated incident, but they had no idea at the time just how many others had fallen victim to Sinaga's trap. Detectives struggled to link this first case with anything larger. The victim couldn't remember the details of what had happened. He didn't know he had been filmed. He didn't even know how many others had been assaulted in the same manner. Sinaga's method was so carefully planned, it was hard to crack. His victims rarely came forward, often too ashamed or confused to report what had happened. It wasn't until the victim's testimony, and later video evidence, came to light that the police began to understand they were dealing with something much larger. It took months, then years, for investigators to connect the dots. As more victims came forward, the true scope of Sinaga's actions became clearer. They found evidence that pointed to a pattern, a horrifying ritual repeated again and again. Young men approached outside clubs, drugged and assaulted, with no memory of the attack. But one thing remained: the videos, chilling documentation of every attack. Then came the breakthrough. Police raided Sinaga's apartment. What they found there was beyond what anyone could have imagined. A library, thousands of video recordings, capturing each victim's assault in shocking detail. The footage revealed the true extent of Sinaga's depravity. His victims, unconscious, exposed, filmed in their most vulnerable state, unable to defend themselves. It was a chilling discovery, but it was the key to unlocking the mystery behind Sinaga's hidden crimes. Through this footage, the police were able to track down the victims, many of whom had no idea they had been violated. Some, in fact, had no memory of ever meeting Sinaga, let alone being assaulted. But the horror didn't stop there. Investigators quickly realized that the number of victims was far greater than they had ever anticipated. Hundreds, possibly more. The sheer scale of Sinaga's crimes was overwhelming. How could one man commit such heinous acts over such a long period without anyone noticing? But the investigation didn't stop there. With each new piece of evidence, a new question emerged. Who was Sinaga, and how did he pull this off? By 2020, the trial of Reynhard Sinaga had become one of the most talked about cases in the UK. The evidence against him was irrefutable. The tapes, the victim testimonies, and the pattern of his crimes painted a damning picture. But in the courtroom, Sinaga's defense was equally chilling. He claimed that his victims had consented to the assaults. He portrayed himself as a harmless man, someone who had simply misread signals, someone who thought his victims had wanted what happened. His defense was an attempt to rewrite the narrative, a narrative that was utterly at odds with the undeniable evidence. The courtroom was filled with disbelief. How could anyone believe these claims when the footage revealed otherwise? Survivors spoke out, sharing their experiences and the trauma they endured. They had been robbed of their dignity, their sense of safety, and their trust. When the verdict finally came, the sentence was clear. Reynhard Sinaga was convicted on 159 counts of rape, sexual assault, and other charges. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 30 years. It was justice for the victims, but the emotional scars they carried would last far longer than any prison sentence. Sound, a slow, dark undertone, indicating the deep dive into Sinaga's mind. To understand how someone like Reynhard Sinaga could commit such unimaginable crimes, we must first understand the mind behind them. Sinaga was, on the surface, a model citizen, a student, a friend, a man of apparent normalcy. But inside there was something much darker. Psychologists suggest that for someone like Sinaga, the thrill wasn't just in the act itself, but in the control. It wasn't about sex, it was about power, manipulation, and the absolute control over another person's fate. His choice to film the assaults was no accident. It was a way to relive the power over and over again. Sinaga carefully constructed a web of trust with his victims. He was always the friendly stranger, the one who offered help or companionship. His charm made his victims feel safe, unsuspecting. But the truth was far from what they could have imagined. Why did he choose his victims? Experts believe Sinaga selected men who were vulnerable, often intoxicated and alone. They were easy targets. His charm was enough to draw them in, and once they were in his apartment, it was too late to back out. While Sinaga's actions may have been methodical, the emotional toll on his victims was anything but. Many survivors were forced to confront the horrifying reality that they had been assaulted, often without even realizing it until they were shown the videos. For some, the trauma was overwhelming. It shattered their sense of trust, their perception of safety, and their understanding of what had happened to them. For others, the long road to healing was a battle with memories they couldn't recall, and the emotional weight of a violation they had never consented to. One of the most devastating aspects of Sinaga's crimes was the aftermath, the mental and emotional scars that stayed with his victims. It wasn't just the assault, it was the profound sense of violation, the knowledge that they had been filmed, exploited without their consent. Survivors spoke of their struggles with trust, PTSD, and the long journey to recovery. Some found solace in speaking out, others in knowing that Sinaga would never have the chance to harm another person. Reynhard Sinaga's crimes left a lasting impact, not just on his victims, but on society as a whole. The case forced a deeper conversation about consent, trust, and the dangers of people who blend into society while hiding their darkest secrets. It changed how we think about predators who operate in plain sight, under the guise of normality. His conviction, while bringing justice to his victims, was only a small step in the larger conversation about sexual assault and predation. It raised the question, how many others like Sinaga are out there, hidden, unnoticed, and waiting for the next opportunity? Thank you for watching this harrowing journey into the life of Reynhard Sinaga. What do you think about his case? How do you believe we can better protect ourselves and others from hidden predators in our midst? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story important, subscribe, and don't forget to ring the bell for more true crime stories each week. Next time, we'll explore another case that shook the world. Stay tuned, because sometimes the darkest truths are the hardest to see.